proudly presents to you at the Summit of Future 2025, former diplomat, prolific author, and magnetic orator, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. I say magnetic because he attracts audiences akin to movie stars. Such is his wit and erudition. And as we all know, he entered politics in 2009 and hasn't looked back ever since. He is fourth time representing the Thiruvananthapuram constituency in Lok Sabha. Can we take a look at that power-packed video once more, please? Ladies and gentlemen, speaking to us about the 4 E's for the future of education, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, MP. Hearty welcome, sir.
Thank you all very much, and I'm sorry that many of you had to wait long and patiently. I'm just turning off my phone so that it doesn't bother us. Long and patiently for me, but thank you very much. A very good afternoon to you, and it's a privilege, really, to be with you today at the Summit of the Future to discuss a topic that in many ways lies at the core of our collective progress, and that's education. As you know, education stands as the bedrock upon which the structure of civilization is constructed, the wellspring from which innovation flows, and the catalyst that propels society towards prosperity and progress. Let me start by expressing my appreciation to Jain University. For over 16 years in Bangalore, this university has been a beacon of excellence, fostering an environment where young minds are nurtured to identify their potential and develop the entrepreneurial skills needed to shape a better future. With its focus on quality education, cutting-edge research, and ethical leadership, Jain University exemplifies the very principles we aim to uphold, creating leaders, innovators, and change makers who fuel economic growth and enrich society. Thank you. It's an honor to address an audience shaped by such an inspiring institution. In today's world, which of course we all know is shaped by rapid change, dizzyingly rapid change, and boundless opportunity, the way we educate must evolve to meet the challenges of tomorrow while honoring the rich traditions of the past. Education has always been more than just the transfer of knowledge. It shapes the minds of individuals, defines the character of societies, and determines the course of nations. As we reflect on the past of education and envision its future, let's consider how we can build on its foundations to create a framework that is inclusive, dynamic, and transformative. We are at a moment in time where the success of a civilization can be measured through its educational apparatuses and institutions, which are tools, after all, of knowledge acquisition and knowledge dissemination, attainments that increasingly trump all others and are becoming the prime determinants of a nation's worth. Indeed, this was not the case for a greater part of human history, when martial prowess and mercantile abilities were accorded far greater importance in past centuries. Indian society, however, has historically emphasized the importance of education as one of the supreme objects of human existence, while celebrating a strong foundation in imparting education through traditional and non-traditional methods. The Guru-Shishya Parampara thrived in ancient India, giving rise to monasteries in modern-day Bengal and Bihar that became major centers of learning. 6 of these, Vikramashila, Nalanda, Somapura Mahavihara, Odantapura, Jagadala, and Takshasila, formed a coordinated educational network nearly 2 millennia ago. Nalanda, with over 2,000 teachers and 10,000 students from across Asia. I mean, how's that for a student-teacher ratio, one teacher per 5 students? Was renowned long before Oxford and Cambridge were even a gleam in somebody's eyes. Its campus featured a 9-story library. Can you imagine 1,500 years ago, a 9-story library? Taught a wide range of subjects, including fine arts, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, politics, and military strategy. Now, in addition to monasteries and formal establishments of learning, informal institutions and methods of education also flourished in India. Our oral traditions of recording and learning have enabled the education imparted in different time periods, even our most ancient knowledge to survive. Mahatma Gandhi, who found inspiration in ways that knowledge of the Vedas, in the ways that the knowledge of the Vedas and foundational Hindu texts, like the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, were passed orally from one generation to another, memorably even advocated oral education in place of the prevailing emphasis on textbooks. He said, the true textbook for the pupil is the teacher. And so in the little ashram that he opened in South Africa named Tolstoy Farm, he taught his students through his own voice, imparting his convictions orally, disregarding the need for formal written work. Now, I'm not suggesting that's how we should go in future, but I'm just saying that's how far back these principles go. As a child at school, I remember being exhorted to impart the alphabet to our domestic help under the Gandhian Each One Teach One program. We seem to have forgotten that, but that's something really worth doing. Many of us were brought up on Swami Vivekananda's writings about the importance of education for the poor as the real key to their uplift. While the ethos remains essentially unchanged, efforts have become more global. And of course, education has become increasingly a key to other kinds of transformation. Consider, for example, Sunita Krishnan's internationally praised work in rescuing children who are sex trafficking victims and reintegrating them into society through education. Or Kailash Satyarthi's lifelong campaign to end child exploitation, leading to global initiatives like the Global Campaign for Education. These movements focus on providing quality education to children and young people worldwide without discrimination. Education as the foundation for progress is recognized by the United Nations through its Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 4 is quality education. Now, from this vision emerges the concept of the global citizen. I'm not referring to myself, as some people in Kerala have a habit of calling me that. It's about the reshaping of our identities beyond the confines of national borders, sharing the merits of transnationalism, but also very often its dilemmas and debacles. When I left India for graduate studies in the United States back in 1975, the term globalization was non-existent. Now it's inescapable. The creation of universal goals, multicultural identities, liberal economics, and the movements they encourage would transcend and transgress boundaries remain our sources for hope and optimism. Even though, yes, there has been a backlash to them, and perhaps during our Q&A we can talk about some of that. This spirit, which can be realized through exchanges of education, knowledge systems, expertise, and so much more, generates awareness of our shared challenges and encourages us to translate these into collaborative solutions. We take recourse to the force of education to challenge, for example, the hate-mongering and the divisive agenda of narrow-minded and bigoted politicians who've risen to power in many countries of the world, rejecting the humane and liberal values of most civilizations. Now, as a nation, we in India have come a long way. Our educational system, which for millions has been increasingly a beacon of hope in a tumultuous world, has not yet become our greatest glory, but it can. It's important to remember where we've come from, our humble beginnings at the onset of independence. Colonial rule left us with only 16% literacy, fewer than 30 universities, and about 700 colleges, which enrolled just 4 lakh students. Can you imagine? This is in a country at that time of 33 crore people, we had 4 lakh college students. For the first 5 decades after independence, India was still the poorest, the most illiterate, the most malnourished, and the least gender-sensitive major nation. We were home to half the world's illiterate adults and 40% of the world's out-of-school children. Yet the progress we've made since then is nothing short of remarkable. Thanks initially to Jawaharlal Nehru's vision, we began to build a vast educational system, producing a generation skilled in science and technology, grounded in humanistic values, and driven by creativity. This marked the start of an educational revolution. When I joined the Education Ministry as a minister a dozen years ago, our education policy was expressed in a catechism of 3 E's: expansion, equity, and excellence. I added a 4th E, employability. Expansion aims to increase the reach and number of institutions. Equity ensures access for excluded groups, marginalized by caste, gender, religion, or region. And excellence fosters innovation and critical thinking. But employability, and this is why I brought it into our slogan in Delhi, is to prepare learners for the skills they need in a global, tech-driven 21st century world. Now, expansion in terms of education was our priority. Why? Because the British left us, as I said, in 1947 with a 16% literacy rate. Just 8.8% of Indian women could read and write. In other words, you put 12 Indian women in a room in 1947 and only one of them could read and write. Today we've gone from 400,000 students to 43 million students, 4 lakh to 4.3 crore students in higher education. From 26 of us, below 30 anyway, universities to 1,160 universities, and from fewer than 700 colleges to 45,000 colleges today. So expansion has taken place. And I must say, this growth has helped empower millions of people and helped us build a more skilled workforce. Now, that was expansion. We also had to fight for the 2nd D of equity that includes the excluded, trying to reach the unreached, the people who didn't get a fair shake in education for reasons they couldn't help: their gender, their caste, their region, their religion. Gender was an obvious reason. I mentioned the fact that only 1 out of 12 Indian women could read and write. Scheduled castes and tribes, neglected regions, many Muslims, all sorts of people got left out of the system for different reasons. We had to bring them in. And that became a big challenge and a priority for education, which I'm glad to say we have largely succeeded in. Now, getting those 2 things more or less right, I don't know how well we did in the 3rd E, which is the E of excellence. Obviously, you need quality, and we set up a lot of institutions of great quality in the country. The IITs are a very good example. IIT Kharagpur, the first one, was established way back in 1956, the year I was born. And it was done on the site of a British detention center, the Hijli Detention Center. So a symbol of political oppression in the past became instead a symbol of hope for the future, of looking to technology for advancement. But for the IITs, IIMs, a few good institutions apart from those, I'm sure you could all pick a few around the country that you would single out. These have largely tended to be islands of excellence floating on a sea of mediocrity. The average Indian higher educational institution is simply not of the quality that you and I, all of us in this audience, would like to see. And that ties into the 4th E I added to the catechism: employability. Talk to employers, talk to CEOs. What will they tell you? That they're simply not satisfied with the quality of the graduates they're getting. The technological sector, particularly engineering graduates, sees 500,000 graduates each year. However, while 70% of the academic institutions believe their graduates are ready for the corporate world, only 16% of the companies actually share that view. There have been surveys by ASSOCHAM, FICCI, CII, so I'm not making this number up. Some companies are essentially running institutions for re-education, not on-the-job training, but just literally teaching graduates they have hired what they should have learned already in university, like the gigantic Infosys campus in Mysore or the TCS building in Thiruvananthapuram. It's not just on-the-job training. As I said, all companies have to do that. It's a full year's education for the people they've already hired to make up for the deficiencies of what they've learned or what they've not properly learned in college. Now, that's the scale of the challenge that we face. In fact, when I talked about the fact that most companies aren't satisfied with the applications they're getting, the organization that I helped conceive and create in the Congress Party and ran for 5-6 years, the All India Professionals Congress, did a survey in Kerala of engineering graduates. We got a few thousand to respond to the questionnaire, and 66% said, engineering graduates, that they were today in jobs that did not require an engineering degree. I'm going to come back to that, but that's the kind of problem. They couldn't get the engineering jobs they thought they had prepared for. Now, this is where education has to evolve. Traditional curriculums that don't incorporate emerging technologies are no longer enough. Of course, I think you may have heard this already from the state government yesterday, but they claim, the state government of Kerala, that they're leading the way in this shift. For example, and this is a very impressive thing, they are pioneering the inclusion of artificial intelligence in the school curriculum, starting as early as class 7, where students engage in hands-on learning of AI. Over 4 lakh students will be introduced to AI concepts in Kerala, giving them a head start in a fast-changing tech world. This practical approach shows that students' AI's real-world applications, which they can see in the classroom, will also ignite their curiosity about technology's potential. The updated ICT curriculum focuses on critical thinking, logical reasoning, and programming, and in Kerala, that's supposed to begin in primary school. These skills are crucial for a tech-driven future. Students in government school classes are already using tools like Scratch and PictoBlocks to explore AI, robotics, problem solving. And this, of course, will help foster creativity and innovation. Additionally, topics like cybersecurity and fact-checking have already come in, and they're helping students to navigate the digital world responsibly. So beyond the classroom, Kerala also says it is developing an AI engine to combat misinformation, leveraging large language models to provide validated, unbiased content through the Samagra portal. These initiatives position Kerala as a trailblazer, ensuring that our students are not just consumers, but creators of future technologies. But as we always know, the ideas are great. The implementation is what we all await before we can pat everybody concerned on the back. Now, Kerala's innovation, like its AI-driven initiatives, showcase what's possible when education is prioritized and reimagined for the future. These efforts set an example for the rest of the country, reminding us that while progress is being made, the broader Indian education system still faces a multitude of challenges that demand our urgent attention if we are to build a robust and equitable system. While we have made significant strides, there's still much more to be done. To start, one of the most fundamental areas we need to focus on is access and inclusivity. Remember that second E of equity. We are trying to put kids into the system at an early age, and as you know, in our country now, under the Right to Education Act of the UPA government, the responsibility has shifted. If children are out of school today, it's the state's fault, not the parents. The government is committed to providing education for all with increasing investments at every level. Now, those of you here are attending or have attended very prestigious universities, and most people in India, we know, don't have that privilege. They study at severely underfunded state universities. To address this, we've launched a scheme to allocate central funds to these universities, ensuring that they have the resources needed for their students. And in fact, even today, you will have seen that the new Kerala initiative on Vigyan Kerala is actually going to be using money from the central government's Rashtriya Uchatar Shiksha Abhiyan, which when I was minister, we came up with and offered to the states to support their education. But I understand money is not the whole answer. There is an entire challenge in terms of addressing various issues, like the gender gap, for example, which is not a gap in Kerala, but it's a gap across many parts of India that we have to overcome. Women's literacy overall in India. Kerala is the only state where women and men are as literate as each other and also as educated as each other. But in India as a whole, it's just under 80% for women, which is much better than the old 8.8%. But women are still way behind men at about 89%. Now, these are estimates. We don't have the census yet, which is overdue. When the census comes, we'll get more up-to-date figures. But it still means that 1 out of every 5 Indian women still can't read and write. And we have to overcome that. But access and inclusivity alone won't suffice. Even our expansion, that first E, hasn't gone far enough. We've still struggled to keep everyone in the education system. There are still too many dropouts. I think the last figure I saw was 68% dropouts after the 8th grade. That's far too, on government schools anyway, but that's far too high. We have to integrate vocational training increasingly into schools for those who just can't manage the kind of conventional learning that government schools are offering, but who may have skills with their hands that can get them jobs in the real world. Too many trades rely on generational knowledge. That is, you'll never be a cobbler or a potter or a carpenter unless your father or uncle is a cobbler or a potter or a carpenter. That's how our country has been for millennia, but it won't do. We now need places where people can be trained for these skills, whether or not this is a skill coming down from the family tree, and where you can actually get a certificate that you can take to other places outside your native village or your local area and be recognized for having acquired those skills. So all of this very much needs to be done. A country of 1.4 billion people, it really is alarming that we still face shortages of masons, plumbers, certified electricians. I think most of our certified masons, if not all of them, are probably in the Gulf right now. So by engaging master craftsmen to train a wider pool of students, we can bridge this gap and open up more career possibilities for the people who are dropping out of school. Alongside this, we also face the pressing issue of another kind of divide, the digital divide. A recent survey, very recent, shows that only 57.2% of India's schools have functional computers, 53% have internet access, and 52% are equipped with ramps for the disabled. Now, these numbers show you significant gaps in both accessibility and technological readiness. The shortcomings in online education highlight the urgent need for enhanced infrastructure and digital resources, especially in rural schools. I can tell you, when I was minister, we were so excited about the potential for video conferencing and massive online courses and so on, and we discovered half the schools we were trying to reach didn't have reliable electricity. So then we gave them generators. They said they didn't have enough diesel. We decided to give them subsidized diesel as well to run the generators. And very often what we found is when we actually got a professor in Delhi to talk to this village school in Rajasthan or whatever, they had already consumed all the diesel for some other function, welcoming some VIP to the school, and there wasn't any generator to generate the electricity to receive the video conference. This was the kind of challenge that is increasingly something we have to grapple with. The last mile connectivity to that last student in the classroom is still far, far from achieved. Now, I do want to say that as we tackle the challenges of access and infrastructure, equal attention must be given to elevating the quality and relevance of our education. We have to ensure that it equips students to navigate and to work in an increasingly complex world. The universities, and I know that Jain University's top administrators are here, face a dual challenge: coping with various demands, the demands of students for impressive qualifications, of employers for viable, usable skills, of the economy for innovation, of the government for entrepreneurship. All of these demands are there. But most universities still function in the classic mold to operate in the realms of education, instruction, examinations, degrees, values, culture, without sufficient connection to market conditions. I mentioned the example that AIPC found of Kerala engineers. Now, why do we have this kind of mismatch? 66% engineering graduates in Kerala doing jobs. And by the way, this is not so anomalous. In other states, a similar problem. I don't know the exact numbers in every state, but in many states, engineering graduates are doing non-engineering jobs, or jobs for which engineering degrees were not required. And the mismatch arises either because their degrees were simply not relevant to the jobs available, or because the quality of the education they received isn't sufficient for pure engineering roles, or because they had no connection between the ivory tower of the educational institution, the university, whatever, and the real world marketplace where people were actually working and dealing with real engineering issues. If our universities prioritize technical and utilitarian needs of the pursuit, for example, of the liberal arts, this alone would not serve our graduates, because you had people who have studied engineering but who are still unemployable. And because they've not done the liberal arts, they will have lost out on a lot that is precious in life. In the post-COVID world, there's been a push to make liberal arts and humanities education more relevant by linking it to practical outcomes. But in this transformation, we're turning disciplines like history or political science, or even entire political science, as some people claim to have studied, into tools for legitimizing political ideologies, and that will frankly undermine the true purpose of education. The humanities should nurture deep thinkers, just as the engineers should be better fit for the job market. If our STEM graduates are rooted in the idea that there's only one way to think and work, they are likely to apply that habit of mind and thought to their understanding of human beings, of politics, of ideologies, and an ideology which tells them that only one worldview is true and right and everyone else is wrong, where only one worldview is patriotic and everyone else is anti-national, that would be disastrous for India. And that's why the humanities are essential, because you need to recognize that the world is a more complex place, that there are always more than one side to a story, that there are nuances and grays, not just black and white. In fact, I remember writing a column some years ago about how Oxford University had done a study, it was about 2005, where they studied all the terrorist incidents around the world in the previous 15 years, and they found that 95% of the terrorists had studied engineering. They were engineers. Now, they didn't draw the conclusion that all terrorists are engineers, nor do they suggest that all engineers are terrorists. But it points to the very point I'm making, that in engineering, these kids were taught only in absolutes, right? So switches on, things will work. Switches off, it won't work. Black and white, binary, 0 and 1. That's the kind of instruction they get. And then if your mindset is only tuned to that, to absolute certainties on every side, somebody comes along to you and says, our religion is perfect, it's the only way to God, everybody else is a blasphemer who is evil, who's doomed to perdition, so it's okay to kill them. These are the kinds of people with that kind of thinking who get seduced by such crazy fanaticism and conduct terrorist attacks. And that's a controversial theory, but it's worth considering. One must balance this kind of education with the humanities. And the humanities can't afford to be too utilitarian, just as the STEM subjects can't afford to be completely theoretical. Now, yes, we are of course worried in very many ways about the question of relevance of studies. People ask, what are you going to do with an English honors degree? You probably understand the world a lot better for reading the great works of literature, but it may not be what an employer is looking for in today's world. But on the other hand, if you see history as a source to churn out people with political ideologies, reduce political science to lessons in nationalism, even English studies becoming communicative English to give you skills for call center jobs, there's something deficient in that kind of education. You can't narrow the intellectual scope of higher education by stifling imagination, philosophical inquiry, critical thinking. Those are also very essential for university products to have. And therefore, while you allow those to grow up, at the same time, you can look at employability separately. Now, I do recognize that systemic and structural changes are necessary. There's a need for the education system to evolve in response to the ever-changing needs of our economy and our society. The central government is committed in principle, but not yet in the budget. We'll see what happens on Saturday, the 1st of February, to increasing funding for research and innovation. But this also requires new ways of thinking, to learn to think outside the box, learning to create. I always tell teachers, whenever I address gatherings of teachers, do not teach young people what to think. Teach them how to think. And why do I say that? Because frankly, what to think was already outdated when I was a student, where we were all encouraged to memorize our textbooks, take assiduous notes at our teachers' lectures, and regurgitate all this in the exam hall. That tests a skill that is decreasingly relevant in today's world. What's the point of being able to remember all the things I remember? I can recite lines of Shakespeare, I can quote memorable lines of classic poetry, and so on. But in the real world, somebody sitting here who didn't learn all of that can find out the same quotation probably more accurately with 2 clicks of a mouse or 1 glance at his or her mobile phone. We're living in the era of Google. We don't need that kind of memorization. But what do we need? We need new ways of thinking. The Oxford Martin School did a study a few years ago in which it said that 30% of the jobs in 2030 across the world, 30% of the jobs in 2030 will be jobs that don't exist today. Now, that report's about 3 years old, so maybe some of those jobs have been created. But how does a teacher teach a student anyway to prepare for a job that doesn't exist? The job hasn't been invented. It will be invented after the student graduates, perhaps. But when he or she goes out into the job market, that's the job that's offering them a hiring place. So what is the employer going to be looking for? A mind. Einstein famously said 70 years ago that the mark of an educated mind is what is left behind in your head after you've forgotten everything you've studied for your examinations. It's how you think, how you approach a problem, how you get unfamiliar facts and figures and so on, and still figure out an approach to them and finding a solution to them. That's what we need to do. And frankly, we in our country have been able to do some of these things. If you Google the phrase frugal innovation, your first 20 hits will all be for innovations in India. The world's cheapest electrocardiogram, the cheapest hepatitis B vaccine, the cheapest insulin injection, the cheapest small car, the Tata Nano. All of these were invented by Indians, and they were terrific achievements, but they were all things invented elsewhere that we've either simplified or stripped down, made more affordable, more replicable, more relevant to our conditions. And that's great, but it's not new enough. We need to do better. We have to invent things that no one has thought of before. The land that invented the zero has to be a land that invents more than zero. We're not there yet. Now, these challenges have persisted for years. The National Education Policy, of course, has been introduced to address these very issues and provides a broad framework for reform. The NEP's vision to improve educational quality, access, and inclusivity is certainly a step in the right direction. But it comes with a new set of challenges that could potentially complicate the path to success. One is, of course, resources. I mean, I've advocated a revision of the 1986 National Education Policy since my days in HRD to bring it into the 21st century. I'm glad that the Modi government finally grasped the nettle. I said so in Parliament, even if it took them 7 years to do so. But the real challenge lies in ensuring that the lofty aspirations laid out in the policy are matched by effective implementation, that the benefits reach everyone and not just those who can afford it. And then take, for example, the target of spending 6% of GDP on education. This was first mentioned back in 1948. Yet every government since then has made the same commitment and has always fallen short when faced with the budget constraints imposed by the finance ministry. In the past 6 years, despite the government's promises, real expenditure in education has actually declined. I'm talking about the central government. Right now, we're spending just over 4% of GDP, so how will we reach that 6%, despite having promised it every year for so many years? Then there are the targets in the NEP for gross enrollment ratio in higher education, which has now been pitched at 50%. and gross enrollment ratio in secondary schooling, 100%. As I mentioned, 68% dropout rate. But you know, this is not yet realistic. Currently, gross enrollment rates in higher education in India, that is, the percentage of people of a particular age group who are in higher education, it's 28.4%. So the question remains, are these targets realistic? Are they just another set of governmental promises, like the government's solar energy commitments in Paris? At the foundational level, when it comes to primary education, there's been some debate about shifting to regional languages as a medium of instruction. And I have no problem with that. People learn better in their mother tongue. Please teach them in the mother tongue. But what about parents who frequently move to different jobs? What happens if parents speak a different language from the prevailing regional language? So the child is speaking one language at home and hearing another language in school. These are all issues that make a child's education difficult. The solution, therefore, must involve some degree of bilingualism, using both English and the regional language so students can benefit from the best of both worlds. The NEP also talks about a multidisciplinary approach to education, but we must tread carefully to ensure this doesn't lead to a superficial understanding of various fields without depth. Otherwise, we would risk creating a semi-skilled workforce that could have dire consequences in a competitive and rapidly evolving economy. And then research and innovation are critical, yet India's investment in these areas has been declining from 0.84% of GDP in 2008, when the UPA government was in power, to just 0.64% today. Meanwhile, countries like China have surged ahead with 111 researchers per 100,000 people. So 111 per 1 lakh persons in China, compared to, you know, how many in India for 1 lakh persons? Any guess? 15. 111 in China, 15 in India. If we're serious about building a knowledge economy, we must invest much more heavily in research and development. Equally important is the role of teachers. The NEP envisions reforms in teacher education, but we must ask whether these reforms can truly produce the quality teachers we need. Introducing multiple entry and exit points in teacher training programs may provide flexibility, but it risks diluting standards. To truly attract the best minds into teaching, we must offer competitive salaries, systemic support, and restore the dignity of the teaching profession. I remember participating in an endeavor to bring some glamour into teaching. A philanthropist, Malayali philanthropist based in the Gulf, wanted to give a big award for the best teacher. So I was able to, in those days I was minister, I contacted a television channel to make it a glamorous event so that the teaching profession could go up in stature. And we had this ceremony where the best teacher was awarded, and the channel broadcast it, but the following year they withdrew. They didn't feel there was enough public interest in rewarding teachers or honoring teachers. And that, to my regret, is something that's at fault in our society. We talk about Mata, Pitu, Pita, Guru, Devam, and all of this. In practice, however, do we give teachers the respect they deserve, and that if they had, more of the best and brightest would go into the system? I mean, let's face it, I'm being completely irreverent here, but the best and the brightest, if they were to take any tips from the marriage market, they know that even becoming a lowly bureaucrat will get them a far more attractive proposition than being a teacher. And this is the reality that so many people are living with today. Now, I would say, therefore, that we really, really need to get the best minds into teaching. We need to make it more attractive. The policy of the national government leans heavily on centralization and private sector and relies on the private sector. Now, JN is a private university and it has a very important role to play. But if we only rely on the private sector, we risk driving up costs and making education inaccessible to the poor. We must ensure that inclusivity and affordability remain at the heart of our reforms. And the private universities, I urge them to have a significant number of merit scholarships for bright kids who just can't afford to pay what it takes to be in a place like this. Now, NEP is ambitious, its vision is commendable, but we must ensure that we recognize India's diverse realities, ground its implementation in equity, practicality, sustained investment, and only then can we build an educational system that truly equips our young people for the challenges we've talked about in the 21st century. I've no doubt that the challenges are enormous. Systemic and structural barriers in education, gender gaps, the digital divide, all of those. But there's no question that here in our country, we have to do better. We have to become fully literate. We have to become better educated. And though the efforts that have been made so far have shown results, as I mentioned earlier, and the foundation for a better future is being laid, we still need to get all these other pieces in place that I've described to you. If we do that, then we can say to the world, we are coming. Our vision for the 21st century must be to make India once again what we used to be in ancient times, a knowledge society. A society in which knowledge is valued, one that is both capable of creating theoretical knowledge of global significance and materially benefiting from it, a society where the pursuit of learning and innovation should not be constrained by any lack of access, infrastructure, or support, where education is relevant to society and provides the skills and competencies that society demands. We must understand clearly we're talking about a knowledge society and not just a knowledge economy. That is a society committed to excellence as an end in itself. Now, a strong culture of research and innovation, as I've said, is key to this. And there's a direct link, by the way, between investments in research and national success in boosting productivity as well. For this reason, academia and industry must work together to focus on this. I'm proud that when we were in government, we got Mr. Narayana Murthy to do a study on academia-industry interface. And we passed a rule, which I believe still is the rule, that we will not allow any polytechnic, for example, to be opened in India unless it has a direct ongoing link with a functioning company within a 30-kilometer radius. So we're tired of people being taught from out-of-date textbooks about out-of-date methods of work when, in fact, the real world has moved on. And this is very important. We want to try and connect much more to the real world. We have to do that. And I do believe that we can position India as a global leader in all this. If the diagnosis is then implemented properly, we can strive for a world of world-class education, cutting-edge research, and abundant opportunity. Of course, this journey will begin in the classroom. Get our kids to have more than the well-filled minds we've been thrusting into their heads, all the facts and figures and formulae, because frankly, you don't need a well-filled mind, you need a well-formed mind. A mind that reacts to unfamiliar facts and details, that can actually synthesize information that it hasn't studied before and find creative new approaches to it. A mind, in other words, that doesn't just prepare you for the examinations, but one that can react to the better examination called life, which doesn't actually only ask you the questions that you're already prepared for. As an elected representative, I believe we still have a chance to prevent our demographic dividend from turning into a demographic disaster. Over 50% of our people are still below the age of 25, a demographic that could be our greatest strength or our greatest vulnerability. We must equip them to become the driving force of the working world, to harness the potential of young India. We need a pool of highly educated and motivated leaders across all sectors. And if we succeed in creating a generation of disenfranchised youth with no stake in our future, and nothing then is more dangerous for our society than an army of uneducated or undereducated, unemployable, and frustrated young men. That is a recipe for disaster. But I want to end by saying there is no dearth of ideas. There's no real dearth of willpower either if we listen to the statements by those in power in both Delhi and here in Kerala. But that will require active changes in policy and active implementation, sweeping the cobwebs out of education policy, of process, of regulation, of over-bureaucratization, and building up towards genuine capacity building and the promotion of excellence. But I really encourage you all to approach all these issues with passion and commitment to excellence. We can find solutions to the problems I've outlined. We can infuse a new energy and a new vigor into this space by building on our traditional strengths in education and at the same time keeping an eye on the opportunities that the 21st century has opened to us. To do this, we need to create a robust ecosystem for higher education in our country and also engage in a unique form of empowerment, one that will bring a lasting and transformative impact on the generations to come. That's how we can fulfill the 4 E's I talked about, and I hope I've made a convincing case for the way forward in the future. I'm very happy to take your questions in the remaining minutes. Thank you all very much for listening to me. Congratulations to the Jain University for this Summit of the Future, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for elaborating on those 4 E's and particularly for putting the spotlight on employability, a key concern of Kerala youth. I'm told that there are a few students who are brimming with questions for Dr. Shashi Tharoor, so let's hear it. Do we have a microphone ready to be passed around? Yes. And can we have you stand up, raise your hand? Yes, you already have the mic. Great, go ahead.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
First of all, thank you so much for your presence and for your insightful talk.
My pleasure. I'm sorry, I've got a light shining in my eyes, so I can't see where you are. Where are you?
Sir, to the
Wave.
left, to your right, yes.
There, that's it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Hi, sir. So my question is, recently I was scrolling through the internet and I came across a video where a CEO was mentioning about his concerns regarding hiring the Gen Z generation as employers. So what actually he was saying is, Gen Z are not as efficient as the previous generations in terms of work. So even after they're coming from we have a technological background. So what would be the underlying reasons for this perceived gap in efficiency when it comes to Gen Z? And what is something that you would like to advise to the Gen Z learners? I'm sure there would be a lot of students, Gen Z students sitting here to listen to this.
To be honest, I have no idea why he said that, and maybe it's not even true, but if it is true, then one problem, which I must say I spot increasingly amongst the younger generation, is dwindling attention spans. That is, that earlier generations may have their faults, but they did a lot more complex and in-depth reading because they had to. That was all there was available to them. They were not seduced by the transient flicker of the screen on their computers and on their mobile phones. These zapping, speedy, short WhatsApp messages through which a lot of information and disinformation is conveyed. And perhaps in that process, they've lost the ability to focus and concentrate for longer periods of time. A second factor that I suspect could be that sadly we have become more individualistic. Whereas in the old days, people were better at collaborative work. They had to meet each other, they talked, they collaborated. Today, more and more people are working on their own, getting information, text from mobile phones, not having to do very much with anyone else. And perhaps that's a second reason. As I say, I don't know why he said that. But if I had to guess the 2 reasons, these would be the 2 things that I think the new generation really ought to overcome. Do more complex, in-depth reading. And it's not just, as I say, work manuals or computer text or whatever. Read for pleasure, read for instruction, read things that challenge your mind, and you will develop in that process the capacity to concentrate, to stay longer at a particular issue, to think about something more deeply, and perhaps that will make you more productive because you don't get distracted as easily as someone whose idea of everything, from their favorite sport, having gone down from 5-day test matches to 3-hour T20s, to their favorite form of getting information, having gone away from a newspaper to a WhatsApp inbox, and from their favorite way of actually entertaining themselves, having gone from reading a 400-page novel to watching a half-an-hour sitcom. Those changes will damage, I'm afraid, people's ability to concentrate and produce productive results. So my urging would be that those two things need to be fixed, and more collaborative behavior.
Yes, sir. I think that point is very valid because he was actually mentioning that the Gen Zs are more of individualistic, and they're very competitive, but they're very individualistic.
Yeah.
So when it comes to a collaboration perspective, they really lack that. So I think that is one point I can link with it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for
Pleasure,
your
my dear.
valuable
All the
insights,
best.
sir.
Thank you.
Great question there. Thank you for that. Do we have another question? Any race? Oh, yes, you're here.
First of all, I would like to say that I was very mesmerized by your words.
Thank you.
And I was very unlucky because I studied in GEMS and I couldn't meet you.
Uh-huh.
and I'm glad that I got an opportunity to talk to you right now.
Sure.
So I have two questions. My first question would be, what are your thoughts on emphasizing practical knowledge over theoretical knowledge
Right.
in universities and schools? And my second question would be, do you think universities and schools should emphasize on history? As I believe that, if you know where you came from, then you know where you should go to in the future. So please tell me your thoughts, sir.
Okay, so the first thing is you need both. In any subject you study, you have to understand the theory, because if you don't understand the theory, you won't be able to apply it in practice. But you definitely need to go beyond the theory into the real world. And I say the real world across the board, in every kind of field. I talked about this business of academia-industry interface. What do I mean? In America, for example, whether you're talking Silicon Valley and California, you're talking the Raleigh-Durham Triangle in North Carolina, it's a very simple thing. Companies will turn to universities and say, hey, we've got this idea. It may be for a product, it may be for a process, it might be for something. We've got this idea. Do you have students, graduate students, doctoral students, whatever, who can research it for us? We'll give you money, and we'll supply stipends to the students and so on. You do the research in your labs on the campus. If you find it's viable and it works, come back to us. We will make it, and you will get a share of the royalties. Win-win for both sides. The students get, in effect, a scholarship and finance. They get practical on-the-job training, dealing with a real-world problem from a real company, and the company gets a benefit of brains they're not paying full-time for. All of this together is what is academia-industry interface. And in these cases, it seems to me, that if we did more of this in India, you would be able to have students who got the theoretical grounding also getting exposure to practical matters. Incidentally, I was chairman of the manifesto committee for my alliance, the UDF, in the last state elections 5 years ago. And one of the things that was suggested to me by a young female student in an all-women's college was, why can't we have internships while we are still studying? And I thought that was a damn good idea. Imagine if an undergraduate, after they've done their classes and then they still have, say, 3 hours a day, during which they can be connected to a company. If it's near enough, they can go physically. Otherwise, they can do it online, can assist the company, can do some research work, can do some writing work, can do some programming, depending on the nature of the job. Look at all the benefits. A, the student gets actual internship experience, which can go into a CV. B, the company gets real help without paying anything like a full-time salary, maybe a stipend. C, the kid figures out, do I really like this job? Do I want to do this kind of thing in the real world? And the company gets to ask themselves, hey, is this person a smart talent? Do we find this person useful enough that we might grab her when she graduates? Now, this kind of win-win is something we really should do. I put it into the UDF manifesto that we need internships during college hours, and we'll give colleges credit for doing that. Anyway, we didn't win the election, so the question's academic, but that's an example of how you can get real-world practical experience while you're still studying. I think it was a very, very interesting idea and came from an undergraduate herself. So these are the kinds of things that we can certainly do, and I think we need to do more of. We've got to have flexibility on the part of the state and central governments to make all this possible. We have to get university administrators, faculty, vice chancellors to be a little less blinkered against these things. No, your job is to study. I'm not going to have you working in a company. Why not? Let them work. You can mandate 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, no more than that. 5 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever. You work out your own formula, but allow it. Give the student extra credit for doing that. It'll really be a benefit for everyone. So that's the answer to your question about the combination of things. On the second question, I made that statement many years ago when I wrote my book on British colonialism. if you don't know where you're coming from, how will you appreciate where you're going? And that's simply because I genuinely believe that our people, all our people, and perhaps people anywhere in the world, our young people should have some grounding in awareness of history. You know, just as we as a family would want to know about our parents, and I hope our grandparents, and ideally, if you're that kind of person, even know before them, we as a society, as a culture, as a country, should know about our historic past. We should know what we've done, what we've not done. We should know the challenges we've overcome. I don't know how many of you knew today that we only had 16% literacy when the British left. I don't know how many of you knew today that we only had 8.8% of our women could read and write. So when you know that, you appreciate how far we've come today. You're not saying it's okay that only 80% can read. No, we want it to be close to 100. There's no such thing as 100% literacy, but Kerala, for example, was last figured at 96.2%, I think. And that is full literacy, because essentially there are a few people who've escaped the net, but everyone who's reachable has been reached. Similarly, if we can get from 80 to that 96 for all women across India, we will have made some progress. But people don't often know the past and don't realize and appreciate what a major challenge we've overcome to get where we're going and what we should aspire to in the future.
I just like to add a point. I believe that many students who study in an international school like me, I did my A-levels. And when I looked at the A-level textbooks, what you said about historical amnesia concerning what the British really entailed was very common in history textbooks in A-levels, where you don't really learn about what the British Empire did. You never learn a line of Indian history. There's always, talks about French wars, Napoleon Bonaparte, and all the British kings, but there's no mention of an Indian king or, for that matter, any British hypocrisies or any British cruelties that have come to India. So I believe that international students who learn A-levels would never appreciate our history because they don't learn about it. So do you think that A-levels should change? Because see, we're in India right now, so
But the answer to your question, not changing the A-level, because the A-levels are a British exam.
Yes.
The IB is an international exam. It's to do the CBSE. That's the answer. But I mean, look, jokes apart. I think that kids who have that kind of education do miss out on something. They can see their society around them. And I think if they see that others are studying and know far more about India, they might be not just a little ashamed, but a little more motivated to do more. The truth is, many of the kids who go to A-level international schools or IB programs and so on really plan to go abroad at the first opportunity. They don't see themselves immersed in India and India's future. And I think that's sad, it's a shame. And when they do go, some of them, or I would say very few of them, actually come back. Most of them tend to go and make other lives outside there, and where it's not relevant to them that they don't know enough about India. Very often I find the next generation, their kids, get very curious about India, want to come and find out more. Where did our family come from? What's the background story? What was our parents' experience? So it's interesting that if you will see today, the younger generations of our diaspora are showing more curiosity about India and traveling here and visiting here and so on than the generation that left.
Thank you, sir.
I don't think we have time for much more. Maybe one last question
Yes,
or no?
just one, yes, and somebody is ready.
Hi,
now.
sir. Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. Here.
Oh,
Yeah?
upstairs, sir. Yeah.
Upstairs,
Sorry
okay.
for that. Jain, sir. My name is Arjun Mohan,
Yeah.
and I am a student of Jain. And
You're from
I'm
Lovedale?
No, I am a student of Jain University.
Jain University, right.
Welcome to the Summit of Future 2025, sir.
Thank you.
You have been a role model of mine for the last 10 years. From
Thank
the
you.
moment I heard your speech about the British colonial rule responsible for the decline of India.
Uh-huh.
And I really wanted to ask you 3 questions. And I'm really sorry for that. I know I'm taking a lot of your time.
Can we limit that to one, please? Because there's one more person waiting here.
Okay, sure.
The most important pressing question. Go for it.
Then I'll start with the question of education then. Why is the fundamental rights not being taught in our schools?
Excellent question. In fact, you'll be pleased to know that I've just finished a book on it's a short book on the Constitution for non-lawyers, non-scholars, just folks like you and me, to understand these fundamental questions. And I must say, I don't think that the Constitution should be confined only to lawyers and should only be confined to those who study for law degrees. Everyone should know their rights, should know what they're entitled to do, what cannot be done, what is the state, that is the government, is prohibited from doing to us, and what the state is encouraged to do for us. These are all things in the Constitution, and people need to know them. So thank you very much for raising this, and I will certainly make this point in the book. It's in the book already, but I'll make sure it's very clear that we need to teach regular folk throughout the country what they're entitled to under the Constitution. These are our rights, and we need to preserve them, protect them, but to do that, we need to know them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing that up on our Republic Day. And for one more question, sir, here. The lady's waiting, yeah.
First of all, I would like to thank you for your amazing lecture. It was really attention-seeking, and I really enjoyed it. My question for you is how to sustain attention in this digital age with the increasing technology and the reliance on technology. How can educators keep students actively engaged within distractions?
I'm afraid there's no substitute there for the old-fashioned thing. I'll tell you, during COVID, when suddenly all the classes went online, a lot of parents told me that this is a disaster, that our children are not able to spend that many hours staring at a screen. They don't have eye contact with their teacher. The teacher is on a camera somewhere far away. They don't have an opportunity to interact with their classmates. They don't have the opportunity to have a break with their friends in between. And this relentless barrage of video instruction. After a while, their eyes glaze over. They're no longer focused. They're no longer getting it. So I think it's extremely important to understand that digital education is at best a complement to what the real human teacher can do. To my mind, the real human teacher is still the answer to the challenges of education. We need human teachers both to teach people directly, but we also need human teachers to interpret the digital instruction where it's required, where it's used, and ensure that it's understood. Not everybody has the same comprehension level as well, either of the language or of the subject matter. So, yes, you're right, we're moving into an age of digital instruction, but let us use it to supplement the traditional methods. I don't think we can get away from that. And I think there is no real substitute for reading. I mean, I'm afraid there are lots of challenges coming up for teachers. For example, I don't know if you knew this, but 72% of ChatGPT users are Indians in India. 72%, it's frightening. So all our kids are probably getting all their work written for them by ChatGPT. And I think the teachers will now have to make that extra effort to make sure that the student who turns in an extremely good essay or term paper or whatever it is also proven to be able by asking them to write something in the classroom. Set some in-class essays. Force them to actually read and think for themselves and not just turn to all these easy tools. They may say, well, in the real world, when we leave, we can use ChatGPT wherever we're working. Maybe. But if they haven't understood the issues themselves, and all we are seeing is what an AI program has learned from some large learning model, then how on earth do we know that this person is of any use, has learned anything, has an educated mind, and is able to contribute tomorrow in the job or whatever else they're going to be doing? We just don't know that anymore. So let's really, really make sure that we see all these modern technologies as tools to help us teach better, help us educate better, help us to learn better also as students, but never as the whole situation, because if that happens, I really fear we'll actually produce a whole bunch of undereducated people who know how to use helpful technology but can't think for themselves. And that will be an even bigger disaster for our society.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'd like to bring to your notice, Dr. Tharoor, through the day, we had to urge students to post their questions, but now that Dr. Tharoor has spoken, the student zone has been activated. So that shows how engaging your keynote address was. And with that, we come to the end of the session. I'd like to bring on stage some very special people to felicitate Dr. Tharoor for his engaging session here. First, I'd like to invite on stage Dr. Chenraj Roychand, Chairman of Jain Group. Welcome, sir. Being joined by Mr. Tom M. Joseph, Director of New Initiatives at Jain University. Also being joined by Sri NSK Umesh, IAS District Collector of Ernakulam. We'd like to place on record our profound gratitude to Dr. Shashi Tharoor for making it here amidst his busy schedule and engaging with our students. Jain University is extremely proud to host Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and that's a token of our appreciation. And for a happy group picture, I'd like to invite on stage also our Vice Chancellor, Professor Raj Singh, and also our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor J. Lata. Please do join on stage. Let's click a group photo together. This is a great moment for us. Let's hear it loud for Dr. Shashi Tharoor, MP, who enticed us with his ideas and is leaving a lot of food for thought.